When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers.
Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race in America. My name is Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. This is episode 2 of Race Haven, and today we're going to dialogue about the primary story that's been surrounding Super Bowl 50, and that is Cam Newton and the backlash that he's received for being perceived as too arrogant on the field. Is it a race thing, or is it just about him as a person? The next topic we're going to discuss is the sentiment that many African-American people around the country will be rooting for Carolina just because they have an African-American quarterback. Is that wrong? And finally, to close things out, I'm going to share some cool facts about the history of African-American quarterbacks in the NFL. So, for those of you who are listening live, call in now to share your perspective on these topics by dialing 929-477-4107. Then press 1, and I'll know that you want to speak. Listening online, be sure to visit and join our Race Haven Facebook group and share any thoughts, questions, or comments during today's show and dialogue with our online community. And I may get a chance to respond to a few during the show as well. So before we get into topic 1, I just want to go ahead and say and get this out there is that this is my first show. Okay, this is the first live show. So I'm a little bit anxious, that's that excitement and those nerves playing at the same time. But I'm really excited, and I'm really hopeful that this show will have a positive impact. So I hope that some of you call in and discuss some of your thoughts. We've been fortunate to already have a raging dialogue taking place online on Facebook already on my personal page when I posted that this show was going live today. And literally, there's probably about 80 comments underneath of the post promoting this show. So in addition to taking callers, I'm also going to pull some thoughts from the comments that went under the Facebook group. So again, if you want to get in, please call in. You can call in at 929-477-4107 and listen, or if you want to talk, just press 1. So let's get into it. Topic 1, Cam Newton and his on-field antics. This has been a lightning rod conversation throughout the country on several blogs and several news media outlets and even some podcasts out there. Because, if I started to really think about this and where it all started. And in terms of it being a national story where you have two sides, that pretty much started this year, earlier this season after a game against the Tennessee Titans. A mother who was in the stands with her daughter, her teenage daughter, her young teenage, I believe she was 12 or 13 years old. After the game in which Carolina won and Cam Newton, every time he scored, he did his patented Superman, pose and his dances. The mother, after the game, wrote a letter to a local newspaper complaining about Cam Newton and how he should be a role model and he shouldn't behave that way. And that sparked national outrage. You had some people on one side who kind of sided with the mother and said that, she's absolutely correct. And then you had some other people who, felt like, whoa, is there a double standard going on? People have been celebrating in the NFL for years. And so why all of a sudden is it a big deal that Cam Newton is doing it? So you had those two sides. And when I say they were polarizing, they were really, really polarizing. So that happened earlier in the year. And as Carolina continued to, move forward and continue to win, the talks picked up. And then as they rolled through the playoffs and into ultimately earning a spot in the Super Bowl, the magnifying glass just really, really got hot on this story about Cam Newton and his antics. Okay, so there's a couple things that really stuck out to me I want to share with all of you. And one was on the Mike and Mike show, Ryan Clark, who's a former NFL player, as well as Mike Golick Jr., who was sitting in for his father one day, they both were talking about it. And literally all last week leading into this weekend and into this second week before the Super Bowl, this has literally been a leading story. So Ryan Clark was able to give his perspective for a couple of days last week on various shows. So on the Mike and Mike show, one of the things that he said that really kind of opened up my mind and kind of gave me a different perspective on it was Cam Newton is displaying a certain flair that is not the norm for the quarterback position. It's the fact that he's an African-American quarterback that can dance and embraces the hip-hop culture. No one has ever done that at that position. A large segment of America doesn't like that. It's new to them, and Americans have a tradition of not adjusting well to things that are different. So that's what Ryan Clark had to say. And those comments really, really forced me personally to examine my feelings. And let me share what my feelings were. Because when I initially, started to watch Cam Newton play, I'll admit that I was a little bit taken aback by some of his antics. And I personally felt like, man, does he have to dance after every first down? I don't really mind end zone, celebrations when you get into, you score a touchdown. I don't mind that. But the fact that he was doing it all game long, jumping up as a quarterback every time he got a first down and giving the first down signal and, doing the little various things, it even rubbed me the wrong way initially. And, not anything really deep-seated, not anything that would make me say I don't like him, as a player or as a person. I just noticed that, I was a little uncomfortable, if that makes sense to everyone. So when Ryan Clark made those statements about it's not necessarily the fact that he's an African-American quarterback, because we've had plenty of African-American quarterbacks in recent history who've been prominent in the NFL. It's the fact that he's an African-American quarterback that embraces the hip-hop culture. He dances like someone who dances in the rap video or, the various different, hip-hop dances and things like that. And that's something that America's never seen before because, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And one of the things that, stands out to me is that when Donovan McNabb was leading the Eagles in the early 2000s, he was very adamant about not wanting to be labeled as an African-American quarterback. He just wanted to be labeled as a quarterback, and he carried himself in that manner. So what's interesting about Cam Newton is he's really the first African-American quarterback to embrace the dominant African-American urban culture in terms of his mannerisms and the way he carries himself, and not really backing down from presenting himself that way. So what that forced me to do, as I listened to Ryan Clark, I had to think twice. And I said to myself, wow, why did I get uncomfortable? And here I am, someone who grew up on hip-hop, someone who loves hip-hop, but I felt a little uncomfortable with the way Cam would do things. And that really made me analyze my position. And if I could be candid, as I really thought about it, I realized that the reason why he made me a little uncomfortable is because I internally, subconsciously felt like I knew that what he was doing would make America uncomfortable. And when I say America, let me say this, the majority, the dominant culture in America, uncomfortable. And the dominant culture in America happens to be European American or Americans of European descent. So with that being said, I really had to question, why did I feel that way and why is that happening? And I think it's because, as an African American, I'm a little bit sensitive to how we are perceived in the grand scheme of things, in terms of how we're perceived, in a greater scale. And with him having that stage, with him being someone who was supposed to be the face of a franchise, the franchise quarterback, not only is he a leader for the team, he's also a leader for that community. in that city state for Carolina. It's a big burden that quarterbacks carry. So it was very uncomfortable for me because I had never seen a quarterback, no matter their race or culture, act the way he did. And as I examine myself, I can honestly share that with you all. Okay? And this show is Race Haven, and what we're going to attempt to do here and what's going to differentiate ourselves from other shows and is the concept of dialogue. So this gives me an opportunity to interject. One of the key points of dialogue is that one of the key characteristics of authentic dialogue, and as we go through this race experience, I'm always going to give little anecdotes about what dialogue is and what it isn't. I'm also going to ask everyone who is listening to our welcome episode, because episode 1 that I did last Thursday, I really went into dialogue deeply and what it really is and how we're going to do it on this show. Going on forward, I'm going to just kind of give little tidbits about what it is and what it is. That being said, one of the key characteristics of dialogue is the ability to examine your own thoughts without defensiveness. Another one is exposing your reasoning and looking for limits to it. So what I'm attempting to do for all of you right now is I'm exposing my reasoning and sharing with you some of the limits I found in my reasoning, and also hoping some of you will jump in and share some of your reasoning behind your thoughts about maybe some of the limits behind my reasoning. And I'm communicating with you my underlying assumptions. That's another characteristic of dialogue. Okay, my goal and aim is not to be right in this situation. My goal and aim is to just share my thoughts and where they come from, with hopes that we can understand each other on a deeper level. And what I'm hoping that some of you will call in and be willing to do the same, can engage in dialogue. And then others will call in and follow up on or add to or ask questions about some perspectives that we all share. So with that being said, that's some of the insights and the underlying, thoughts that I was having as I examined myself about why I personally felt uncomfortable with the way Cam Newton carried himself. And I realized it's because I perceived that the dominant culture or the majority culture in America, which is, again, European American culture, a large majority of them may be uncomfortable with who Cam Newton was, and that made me feel uncomfortable. So I hope that makes sense. So moving forward, before I bring in some questions or callers, anyone online who's a caller who wants to speak, be sure to press the number 1 if you would like to speak. And again, you can call in the show by dialing 929-477-4107. So another thing that Ryan Clark said, he said that one of his former teammates, he has a training facility, and one of his former teammates' wife was in the training facility, and she said to Ryan, it's something about Cam Newton that just rubs me the wrong way. She couldn't say what it was. She just said it's something about him that rubbed her the wrong way. So again, there's some underlying thoughts, beliefs, perceptions that we all have that cause some of us to be rubbed the wrong way by Cam Newton. Okay? And then it all led into where Cam Newton had a press conference earlier this week where they really pressed him. Last week, towards the end of last week, before this week, where they had media day at the Super Bowl. But last week, they asked him a question. And one of the things that Cam said that really, poured even more gasoline on his fire was he said, I'm an African-American quarterback, and that scares people because they haven't seen nothing they can compare me to. The simple fact that he mentioned himself as an African-American quarterback and scare, that totally, pushes some buttons in the African-American community. I can say that from speaking from experience. But the fact that he said that, and he said that in reference to himself playing a position, and that there's nothing that people can compare him to, again, that just poured a lot of flames onto the fire of this discussion, okay? And again, it brings me back to Donovan McNabb, quarterbacks like Warren Moon, Doug Williams. These are quarterbacks who are known for not wanting to be recognized as an African-American quarterback. However, Cam Newton stood up there on the podium and said, I'm an African-American quarterback. And that's unprecedented because most quarterbacks don't want to be characterized as that. So with that being said, I want to ask you, do you think that Cam should acknowledge and want to be acknowledged as an African-American quarterback? Or should he just want to be a quarterback? Should Cam want to be acknowledged, or should he just want to be a quarterback? That's a question I have for you, the listener. Okay? Now, the next question I have for all of you, and then I have an answer from one of our Facebook participants, is with all these things that were going on with Cam Newton throughout the last 2 weeks, again, there's been a lot of pushback and, a lot of opinions on both sides. And because I have the privilege of having a diverse group of friends, I see a diverse group of opinions and perspectives. And one of the perspectives that I saw is that some people feel like this is a trumped up media sensationalized issue and that there really isn't an issue. And really, it's not a race thing at all. Okay? Most of the people who don't like Cam Newton, they don't like him. If they don't like him, it would be because of the way he carries himself and not necessarily because of his race. So do you agree with that? Does America really hate Cam Newton, or are the few getting a majority of the headlines? So let me go to someone on Facebook. I have a friend on Facebook. His name is David. And one of his comments to this was, it's only about race when people make it about race. No one cares about this. Brady caught a lot more heat. Manziel caught a lot more heat. And then he said, really so about Manziel. But basically, David's position is that no one really cares. No one cares that, no one cares about Cam Newton. This is just a big old media sensationalized story. How do you feel about that? Okay, I'm curious. Do you guys really agree with David's statement? And if you want to then and answer some of these questions that I'm asking, again, the dial-in number is 929-477-4107. And if you press 1, then I should receive a notification that you want. So let's see here. We have some listeners, and let's see if this is a notification. All right. And bear with me. This is the first show. I'm really excited about this, and I'm learning on the fly as we go here. Okay. Don't know if that's a request, but if you want to listen, if you want to comment, just press the number 1. But while you do that, and if anyone's out there on our Facebook page, if you want to comment on that question, just go ahead and comment and tag me, tag my name, whether you're on Race Haven or you're on my personal page, because there's a lot of dialogue going on. Okay, I see 2 question marks. Okay, I believe we have a couple of people that want to speak. So let me go ahead and bring someone in. The phone number starting in 404 area code, ending in 6150. When you come on, if you could just state your name, calling from, and share your perspective. Hello, caller, are you there?
Scott. Yes, Scott. This is Oz Gaitan from El Paso, Texas.
Welcome to the call. Thanks for calling, Oz.
Yeah, I think you brought up, I think from the things that you were bringing up, I think the most fascinating question that you brought up that can I kind of push our limits and see where things may be a little bit racially motivated, or at least predominantly culturally motivated, is the question as to whether Cam should be happy being a quarterback or an African-American quarterback. I think that was a very good question. For myself, I hadn't actually thought about it that way. I think that might be a place where culture really plays a big role, because one of the things that I think has been overlooked, and I thought Clark did make a very good point, and Mike, is that it's one of the aspects of the African-American culture that is being represented by Cam Newton that is normally associated more with other sports or other positions such as the NBA. The NBA is more usually gravitated towards the hip-hop culture, and I don't think we've ever seen it in the quarterback, and I think that's what's making a lot of people uncomfortable.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective. I definitely know that this whole hip-hop culture and it coming into the mainstream may make some individuals feel uncomfortable. I appreciate your perspective. Let's see. What do you think about so let me ask you this. So do you think it's more so about race or more about culture? Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Do you think it's one or the other, or do you think they're combined in any way?
No, I think it's more about culture, and I think when we were on the Facebook discussion, I did bring up at least my experience. I'm a Cowboy quarterback. I'm a Cowboy lover. I was raised with the philosophy of Tom Landry. If you'll recall, with Hollywood Henderson, he got suspended from playing because he raised up his finger saying, "I'm number one," while they were not in the lead. And he thought that was showboating. He thought it was against sportsmanship. So primarily, I believe this is more of a generational issue. I think when you were talking earlier about how uncomfortable you felt about this look, it is partly due to the fact that we're not used to seeing a quarterback celebrate the way defensive linemen do, the way all other people do. And I think that novelty is kind of making all of us uncomfortable, whether we're racist or not, or whether we're prejudiced or not. But overriding everything, I think if you look at it, even in the media, or you look at the people that are talking, I guarantee you they're above a certain age. Those of us who were raised back in the day when you were not flamboyant, you didn't say, "Look at me," we're the ones who are probably the most uncomfortable with this new form of celebrating after every first down or even touchdowns. And then quarterbacks hardly ever did that, and then you started seeing things like the discount double check from Aaron Rodgers, and I hated that. And he's white. So for me, I think it's a generational thing first. Then come the racial undertones with that fantastic question you asked to push ourselves. Is it because we have a certain view that's dominated by the predominant culture to say this is the way a quarterback should act? And it's always been a position that's been dominated by white culture, not so much by African American culture. And me, myself, just to be completely open, I'm first generation Mexican American, so I'm Mexican. I don't consider myself part of the white culture or the black culture, so I'm coming at it kind of from an outsider's point of view too as well. So I would say it's less racially motivated, more generationally motivated, than culture blended in with race comes in for the next part of it that makes us uncomfortable.
Awesome. I appreciate that perspective. Thank you, Oz. Have a good one. We're going to go to the next caller, and we're going to see if the next caller has any thoughts to, I guess, well, first share their perspective, or if they have any comments to Oz and based on what he shared. So caller calling from area code 215, ending in 8060. Please state your name and where you're calling from, and welcome to the dialogue.
Hey, what's up? This is Kurt from Philly. What's up, Scott?
What's up, Kurt?
So, I definitely think it's multi-layered, and I believe that I do believe that the media, Super Bowl, it's hype week for the Super Bowl, so the media is definitely driving the story, but the ability for it to even be a story is definitely racially motivated. With culture involved as well. But what gives him access to that culture is the fact that he's a black guy, and it allows for the label. Even you using the word antics, like antics. It has a negative connotation to say that look at his antics on the field. As opposed to look how he celebrates. So I think we are predisposed to look through this racially tinged lens when we see individuals doing things. I think it's very important to identify as a African American quarterback. Why not? That's what he is. And culturally, these guys are oftentimes suppressed culturally because they have to represent the face of the organization. So they have to conform to a standard that is really not their standard. It's the standard of the dominant culture or whoever is writing these paychecks. And most African Americans can identify with that aspect of things.
Well, let me jump in really quick and dig so we can go a little deeper. Why do you think it's important that he identifies as an African American quarterback?
I mean, obviously that's his identity. That's who he is. He is an African American quarterback.
But Donovan McNabb, he was very adamant about saying, "I'm not an African American quarterback. I'm just a quarterback."
Right. The thing is that the culture that that these people come up in, they have to shed it to be able to go further. And that only enhances the hold of the dominant culture and allows them to remain being uncomfortable with something different than what's dominant. So the more and more he says, I'm just a quarterback, and I'm a play ball and be the face of the organization the way dominant culture dictates, not the way of who he is, how, like I said, I'm sure many African Americans can identify with, having to change essentially, like the way they talk, the way they look, the way they dress to conform. And that level of conformity allows for society to not be comfortable with things that are different. And that goes across a lot of different ranges as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that perspective. So let's move on, and we're not totally done with this topic just yet. However, those are some great points. I just wanted to share my perspective on a few things that both Oz and Kurt shared, and that is, first of all, I appreciate them bringing their perspectives, and we grow from listening to other people's perspectives. And the whole concept of dialogue is really not about being right or wrong, because we all have our own truths, okay? And the reason why I wanted to facilitate this show is because I feel like if we all listen to each other's truth, then it begins to expand all of our perspectives and all of our ideals. And ultimately, as we continue to dialogue, we can begin to work towards a common truth. And in that common truth, we build relationship. And I believe that if we build relationship as a culture and as different people in this country, we'll move towards racial harmony. And what's interesting that I'll note is that, okay, Oz said that he was Mexican American, and Kurt is African American, and I know that because he didn't say it, but I know Kurt. And I myself am an African American, so I can only speak from my perspective. And hopefully we'll have some other perspectives join us as well. But one of the things that's interesting is that my friend David, I hesitate to say this, and he can clarify at a later time, but I would say that I know that he's of mixed heritage, but I think that he may, and again, this is an assumption and it's not true, so let me go ahead and preface it by saying that. But I know David as well, and he's a friend of mine, and also he made this comment on Facebook. He said, no one cares. But what I'll say is David, if you see David, let me say it that way, if you see David, you would think that he was an American of European descent. I know that David is of mixed heritage of Haitian and European descent. So, but he looks like he's just European American. So I think that he identifies with both of his, I know that he identifies with both of his cultures, but in the eyes of others and when he's in social settings, I think that he just, the assumption is that he's European American. That's the best way to say it. So in those circles, or from David's perspective, he said no one cares about this, right? But because that's his perspective, right? However, from what Kurt was just saying, it does matter. And that's what I find interesting. And that's what the reason why I think these conversations are necessary. Because I think that while it may be easy to just blow something off and say, well, no one cares about it because you personally don't care about it, I think that, again, in order for us to move forward as a nation and take the lead and be proactive about these racial issues, we have to abandon, and this is Scott speaking, I think that we have to abandon the idea that if I don't care about it, or if it's not meaningful to me, then it's not meaningful at all. Okay? I think that we have to have a broader vision on what it takes to make everyone in America feel comfortable. And that will eventually help us move towards equity and harmony, which is the goal. So with that being said, and another thing, Oz said that he thinks it's more of a generational difference than it is race. And what I'll say to Oz about is something that Kurt said from my perspective. And what I would like to put out there is that the idea of something being generational in America speaks to race, because past generations in America, their mindsets, their beliefs, their virtues were formed from the lens of the dominant culture, which is European American culture, okay, which stems from a culture of, historically speaking, of white supremacy and being uncomfortable, historically speaking, with everything that African American people did. I guess our existence on this country in general is in general, it is uncomfortable, and for many, they've moved past that, but for some, from a generational standpoint, they still hold those beliefs and those values. So while he thinks it's generational, my question to him and anyone listening would be, but doesn't that generational divide speak to a racial divide just because of the country we live in? That's the question I would have for you, Oz, to ponder further, and anyone else who's listening who may think it's just a generational thing. So moving on to our next topic, and that was an awesome dialogue, and I appreciate both Oz and Kurt jumping in. You know what? I do want to say one more thing before we leave, because I think this is important. And this is the survey that kind of touched off the amazing dialogue that's going on Facebook right now. But ESPN did a survey, and they said that a larger percentage of NFL fans believe that Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton faces criticism because of actions on the field more so than because of his race. And this survey was produced for ESPN by the Langer Research Associates and released yesterday on Wednesday. Nearly 2 out of 3 fans, 62% to be more exact, believe that any criticism of Newton is because of his style of play on the field. 63% of white fans and 38% of black fans feel that way. Only 14% think it's because of his race. Only 14%. The number of people who think race is part of how Newton is perceived is significantly higher among blacks who responded to the survey. 34% think criticism is racially based, while 38% think it's for his flashy style. From the individuals commenting on Facebook, one of the points that were brought up was that only 14% of the people think it's about race. And if you're one of those people who don't think it's about race, you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm justified, right? I'm justified because only 14% of the people out of, I believe, 700 respondents believe it's about race, and 38% of them were actually African American. So this is not about race. It's more about his style on the field, his brash, his bravado, right? His dancing, his moves, and those things that make people feel uncomfortable. But once again, what this survey does not speak to, and the entire purpose of this show and what we will be doing from this point going forward is taking it deeper. There's levels to it, right? So again, that 62% who say it's not about race, they think it's about his style, speaking to what Kurt said, but it's his style and the fact that he's an African American with his style is what many African Americans perceive to be the issue. And there's something underlying in all of us as Americans. And as I stated earlier in the show, as I examine my own opinions and thoughts and perceptions, there's something underlying in all of us, okay? And that something is called implicit bias. So for the people who don't understand the concept of implicit bias, you may look at this and say a majority of Americans don't think that's a problem. So it isn't a problem. Only 14% think it's about race. But here's what this poll did not take into consideration. And they didn't take into consideration what's called implicit bias. So implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. Okay? Residing deep in the subconscious, these biases are different from known biases that individuals may choose to conceal for the purposes of social and political correctness. Rather, implicit biases are not accessible through introspection. Okay? So the last point I'll make is that implicit bias, in terms of a few key characteristics, and I'll share the resource that I'm reading from in a second, but implicit biases are pervasive. Everyone possesses them, even people with vowed commitments to impartiality, such as judges. Okay? And I got this information from an institute at The Ohio State University called the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. And they have a website called Understanding Implicit Bias. And there's some really good information on there. And the key is that all of us have, implicit bias. And if you're not aware of it, and if you're not skilled in terms of having the ability to question it, or it's never been on your radar to question it, you won't. But I want to challenge everyone to examine, do you have any implicit biases based on, and this is important as well. Where do these implicit biases come from? Well, the implicit associations, and I'm quoting again from the website, the implicit associations we harbor in our subconscious cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, age, and appearance. These associations develop over the course of a lifetime, beginning at a very early age through exposure to direct and indirect messages. In addition to early life experiences, the media and news programming are often cited origins of implicit associations. Okay? So I would just caution everyone to look a little bit deeper than what's on the surface in terms of what that survey said. So what I want to do right now is before we transition to the next topic, is I want to pause to welcome any new listeners who are just joining us. Welcome to the Race Haven radio show and podcast. This is Solutions-Focused Dialogue about race in America. My name is Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. So we just finished discussing Cam Newton and all the media hype surrounding him and his statements this past week. If you missed it, the recording of this episode will be available shortly after the show at the same link. Next, we're also going to discuss the sentiment that many African-American people will be rooting for Carolina just because they have an African-American quarterback. Is that wrong? And finally, to close things out, I'm going to share some cool facts about the history of African-American quarterbacks in the NFL. You can call in now to share your perspective on these topics by dialing 929-477-4107. Then press 1, and I will know you want to speak. So, with that being said, earlier this week, I got into a heated text message debate, which I really despise because you can't really, elaborate effectively and speak to the various contexts. But anyway, I'm going to, again, put my thoughts out on the table and we're going to get into it. And I want to hear some of your thoughts as well. So if you have some thoughts on this, you can dial in. So what I want to share is that earlier this week, I sent a text. I have a text message group with some of my college buddies. And one of the message I sent out was that we were talking about the Super Bowl, and I said that I wanted Carolina to win the Super Bowl because they have the black quarterback, or, Cam Newton. And I'm not a Carolina fan. I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. However, I'll share with all of you that I have a bias towards African-American quarterbacks and coaches. And whenever my team is not playing or they're out, I want to see African-American quarterbacks win when it's the playoffs. And it's not always easy because in this situation, it really isn't easy because I like Peyton Manning, and I think that it would be a cool story for him if he wins and he's able to walk off into the sunset, as with the second title. However, generally speaking, I'm rooting for the African-American quarterback to win the Super Bowl, hands down, every single time. Okay. And it was that case in the last 3 years. We had an African-American quarterback in the Super Bowl, and I was always rooting for them to win. And when there's been an African-American coach, I've always rooted for them to win. So I didn't really get into the reasons and the underlying assumptions behind that in the text because initially, but eventually I did. but it was still tough to do. But I'm going to take this opportunity to do so because I know a lot of you out there have heard that sentiment before. And for those of you who are not African American, you may not understand why, African American people kind of have this bias towards wanting to see African American people do something or win just because they're African American. So I want to elaborate on that a little bit. And my friend checked me on it. He initially was just like, man, that's not cool. He's like, I'm surprised you would say that. He said, knowing I'm very introspective and I try to think deeply on different topics, he really was like, man, I'm surprised you would say that. You want him to win just because he's black? Just because he's black? It doesn't have anything to do with, the person he is or, the team, the player or, and he kind of just threw a bunch of different examples and took it, and the conversation went a lot of different places. Okay. But I'll just start with, he just really challenged me on it. So I initially got into, why. Now, here's what I'll share with you all. Because my friend is African American, and there was another friend who felt the same way, and he chimed in as well, I assumed, and this is what this is what a lot of people always do. I assumed that because he was African American, that he would understand my sentiment and understand the underlying reasons for my sentiment. But obviously that was a false assumption. And one of the things that I hope to do, again, through this platform is to go beyond and dig deeper beyond these assumptions so that we can put our assumptions out there and learn from each other's assumptions, because I think we all do that. So with that being said, what was behind that? Well, throughout the history of, we'll stick with the NFL. Throughout the history of the NFL, African-American quarterbacks have been stigmatized. So going back to prior to, I say the 80s, probably the mid to late 80s, it was really tough to break in to the NFL as an African-American quarterback. And, the NFL started many years before that, various national football leagues, whether it had a different name before it officially became the NFL, before they merged different leagues in the 60s, I believe, there were other professional football leagues, and African-American quarterbacks were stigmatized. They were not allowed. And even up into the only African-American quarterback who is in the NFL Hall of Fame is Warren Moon. And I recently watched a story about his career. And Warren Moon, when he went to college in the 70s, he had to go to a junior college, first of all. He was one of the best high school football players, but he had to go to a junior college to prove himself because the stigma back then was that African Americans could not think the game. They were not cerebral enough. They were not smart enough to play quarterback. They were not smart enough to lead men. And more importantly, a lot of owners or leaders of teams in college did not want an African American to be the face of their team, because in football, the quarterback is the face of the team. So Warren Moon had to go to JUCO and eventually junior college, and then eventually he went to a Division I school and had a great career at Washington University, and set records and won the Rose Bowl and won MVP of the Rose Bowl. And then he was being told that he was not going to get drafted into the NBA, into the NFL. So he eventually went up to the CFL, won championships, broke records, and played up there for 5 or 6 years before he got a chance to play in the NFL. So he was already, wasted about 5 or 6, 7 years of his football career playing in Canada because no one would give him an opportunity in the NFL. And when he finally came to the NFL, he went on to be a Hall of Famer and prove everyone wrong. So for me, when I say that I'm rooting for African-American quarterbacks, especially in the Super Bowl, it has nothing to do with a race thing. It has nothing to do with I'm rooting for them. It's not just because they're African-American, and it's not because I don't want to see a European-American win it, okay? Because there's plenty of European-American athletes that I like, that I'm a fan of. So for me, it literally is I want to see, let me say it like this. I know that the more African-American quarterbacks that are successful, the more African-American quarterbacks that win Super Bowls, that will open doors and continue to change that perception. And for me, it's not even that I want to see that perception change, because in a sense, it's been changed on a large scale, but there's, still a disproportionate amount of African-American quarterbacks in the NFL. I believe there's only, and I don't know the number exactly, but I believe it's less than 10 okay, maybe like 6 or 7 starting quarterbacks in NFL that are African American. But I don't just want to see minds open. I want to see African American quarterbacks win Super Bowls, because in my mind, it's like they're sticking it to the people of that mindset. And that's what I want to see. I don't just want them to get chances and opportunities. I want them to win big, because I want every person that's still alive that was from that era, that had that belief system, to as they say, eat crow, right? I want to stick it to them. I want them to feel silly for feeling that way, okay? And ultimately, those individuals in society who felt that way, the people who sent hate mail to Warren Moon when he was a player in college and called him all these different names, okay, those people are still alive. They're still in America. And I want an African American's success to be a reminder to them of the mindset that they have and how ignorant it was, okay? Because we have a tendency, in my mind, in America, just because things are getting better, that we want to absolve people from the past who had these underlying beliefs and feelings. But these people are still alive. They're 40, 50, 60 years old today, and I don't know if they've changed their belief systems, okay? Some people in power that run these teams, they've changed their belief systems in a lot of ways, okay? But there's still some questions about that, especially the recent debates we had about African-American coaches in the NFL and the lack of representation there. So we still have a long way to go. So these are the underlying reasons why I want to see African-American quarterbacks and coaches win Super Bowls and win big. So I hope that clarifies it. That's my perspective. I would love for someone to jump in for the last few minutes of the call, of the show. We have about 5 minutes to go. The number is 929-477-4107. Press 1 if you have any thoughts, questions, comments about what I just shared about wanting African Americans to win the Super Bowl, and me saying that I want Cam Newton to win the Super Bowl because he's an African American. But to go deeper than that, it's a little bit more to it than just that, okay? And it's not necessarily about a dislike or a hatred towards European American quarterbacks. It's more about sticking it to the old mindset, if that makes sense. So we have a caller calling in from area code 215 and the last 4 digits 1873. Please state your name and where you're calling from, and welcome to the dialogue.
Hey, Scott, it's Shalita from Philly. Well, not from Philly, but outside of Philly.
Hello, Shalita. Welcome to the dialogue. What would you like to share?
I just want to say that knowing you, I don't think that there's anything wrong, and I have the same thing. I mean, I don't know enough about football to, qualify any particular team, but I do like watching Cam dance. I think it's fun and it's funny, not because I didn't realize that it was like a thing where they're putting it in someone's face, like it was teasing them. I just thought he was celebrating, and I thought it was cute. But aside from that, I think it's just about rooting for the underdog. I mean, that's a simple concept, right? I mean, everybody wants the underdog to win, and who you feel is the underdog is the African Americans in this case because of the history that's been, so one-sided. So I don't think that's a hard concept to understand, is that people want to see the underdog win. And in this case, in this country, especially right now, the underdog would be the African-American quarterback because they're few and far between. Like you said, they have a history of being discriminated against, not being able to play. They had to fight to get, recognized as being able and proficient enough to play that leadership role. So I think that's a really good reason to root for the underdog in this case. I don't think it's racist at all because, like you said, there's a story behind Peyton Manning. Even I've heard about that story. I know hardly anything about football, but, I was rooting for him too. Like I would want to see him win as well. But when it comes to, the African-American quarterback, my heart is there because I see myself in his shoes. I know where I myself have been an underdog, and I've had to push against the odds, and we share a common legacy. So anytime you share a common legacy with someone, and you have 2 factors that are contributing to your wanting him to win. You share a common legacy, and he's the underdog. So I don't think that's racist at all. That's my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you for your perspective, Shalita. And you gave a great analogy by saying, rooting for the underdog, because that's really the way I see it, and that's kind of the sentiment behind, what I was saying. And I hope that, and I'm gonna, you don't have to comment, but I'm gonna leave you on just for a moment, just in case you want to, Shalita. But I hope that we get some people who think differently to contribute as we move forward, or if there's anyone on the line currently or listening currently that would like to share a different perspective, please call in 929-477-4107. Press 1 to jump in really quick. But there's something that someone said online that I wanted to share and kind of get your thoughts on, Shalita. They said that there's a raging debate going on Facebook right now, and one of the comments about this, what we're talking about, and one of the comments is, what's been made clear from these debates is why racism still exists in America. Some just love to hang on to it. So there's this sentiment out there from some of my European American friends and some of my African American friends that I'm sure there's other nationalities who may feel the same way, but that sentiment is that the reason why these problems still exist is because I started this conversation and other people are talking about it. It's like we're hanging on to it instead of just letting it go. And I would love for someone who thinks that way to call in and share their perspective so that we can grow from it. But Shalita, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think it's I think this country right now, privileged people in this country who have who don't share in the oppression of African American people, a lot of them are really sick. They're sick with this idea of superiority, and they're sick. It's a sickness. It's a disease. It plagues them. It's not a African American problem. It's a white people problem. The fact that the mere idea of things being on a level playing field is so terrifying to some people. And just when it comes back to why do people hate Cam Newton, I think that's a good example of this illness. I mean, to a large degree, I believe that the same people who hate Cam Newton also hated President Obama. These people may not have anything to do with football. These people may not have anything to do with politics. It's because, it's just to see a dynamic, effective leader of, African American leader winning, it makes some people feel very uncomfortable. It challenges their whole worldview. So if you're going to say, you would very much like to say, racism I'd rather believe that you're lazy. I'd rather believe that you're inferior. I'd rather believe that you're harping on about nothing than actually dig into my illness. People do it all the time. People die from cancer because they don't want to go and get it checked out. People die from smoking. They keep smoking. They're breathing in the cancer of their ego. Of the superiority, false, ideology of superiority that they have in their head. They don't want to face it and address it and do the work that it's going to take to stop it. So it's much easier to say, stop talking about that. Don't talk about it.
Okay.
So that's the thing. People are upset because we're challenging their worldview. We're asking them to think.
Thank you for your perspective, Shalita. We have another caller calling in that I want to get to, but thank you for contributing to the dialogue.
No problem.
So we're going to move on to another caller, but before we do, I just want to, say what we're talking about. I asked Shalita, I have a friend who's European American on Facebook that said, what's been made clear from these debates that's raging about this topic on Facebook is why racism still exists in America is because some just love to hang on to it. So basically the sentiment is because we keep talking about it, is the reason why these things won't die down. And, Shalita just stated that a lot of European Americans hold on, have that belief, and they have some form of what she called a sickness because of it. But I want to say that it's not just, well, let me say this. I know African American people that have these same sentiments. So it's not just a European American thing. There's a lot of people who have that sentiment. Granted, I understand, where it originates from. But we have a caller, and at 404, and then the last four numbers, 6150. Please state your first name and where you're calling from, and welcome to the dialogue.
Hey, Scott, I couldn't stay away from this one either. Sorry I called back, but I think I just want to add a perspective, and I would love to see you do a whole show just based on this question.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me stop you.
Sorry.
Let me stop you. Could you give your name and where you're calling from, just because we might have some new listeners?
Okay, yeah, this is Oz Gaitan from El Paso, and I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a child psychiatrist, and I know we've discussed things online before about this issue before. It'd be a great show topic for a whole hour, but I think what we're talking about here, that the sentiment that the gentleman was bringing up, is just a natural response to a traumatic experience. Trauma victims do this all the time. The people who survive trauma, and I mean the people who perpetrated the trauma and the people who were victims of the trauma, the natural response is to either ignore, try to forget, try to downplay it, and try to avoid. So that's one coping mechanism that a system that has been traumatized can use to get over it, quote unquote. And you ask survivors all the time, or you ask people who perpetrated, and they say, well, I'm past that and I'm over it because I don't bring it up and I don't think about it anymore. But it's always there. It's underlying. It's underneath. And there's a difference between processing and re-traumatizing yourself. And when you do it in the way that you're trying to do it, with dialogue, with open dialogue, you are reprocessing a traumatic event, i.e. slavery, racism. This is all a big traumatic issue that the best way to deal with it is to reprocess, reintegrate it into our consciousness as Americans, and that's where true healing is going to come from, not by rehashing the same arguments over and over again, because that's just re-traumatizing, which is, I think, what people are trying to avoid.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective, Oz. And yes, that is the goal of Race Haven. That is the goal of the dialogue. And that is why the whole concept of this show is dialogue, not debate, not argument, but dialogue. So with that being said, I appreciate those perspectives, and they were very poignant. And to speak to what both of you just said, I mean, I don't want to even add anything to that, because I think that there's a lot that our listeners can take away from those comments. So I want to transition to closing out. But before I do, I want to talk about our final topic, which is I just wanted to introduce everyone, especially all of our football fans, to something called the Big Book of Black Quarterbacks. Okay, and it was a book that was put online at Deadspin.com. And if you Google Big Book of Black Quarterbacks Deadspin, you'll find it. Okay, and there's also a link to it underneath the post about this show on our Facebook page at our Race Haven Facebook group. So if you're not a member of Race Haven, go ahead and join, and you'll see the link to this article. But just to highlight a few things, what's really cool is the author did some research to literally figure out every African American quarterback to ever step foot in the NFL. And basically it says, and I'm going to quote from the article, so the Deadspin staff set out to find and name every single black quarterback ever to play in the NFL. First, we had to establish a methodology. For players to be considered, we decided that they had to be black to define themselves or be defined by others as black or have a black parent. Second, they had to make the NFL as a quarterback, okay? And it goes on to, state some more qualifying things. And then under all of that, it literally goes on to list every African-American quarterback to ever step foot in the NFL. But what's really cool is there's a narrative about each one as well. Anecdotes from the player, quotes from the player, quotes from their peers, teammates, coaches, and the backstory behind each player. So for those of you who are like me, who love history, this was like an awesome combination of two of my passions, history and sports. And you can go in, take a look at everything, get to know some of the history. And I'll just highlight one person who was the first. His name was Fritz Pollard. Okay. And it was 1920 to 1926 that he played for the Akron Pros, the Milwaukee Badgers, the Hammond Pros, the Providence Steamrollers, and the Akron Indians. Okay. And as you go and continue to scroll down, there's a narrative about him and his backstory. He was the player and the first coach that was African American to ever step foot on a pro football field in this country. But there were no stats for him. But the cool thing is every other player starting in 1932 with Joe Lillard, every other player, it has when they were drafted, how many games they played, what were their statistics, their yardage, touchdowns, interceptions, completion percentage, QB rating, rushing yards, touchdowns, fumbles, everything. Okay, and then there's a narrative about the struggle or the successes that they had. So an awesome resource that I wanted to share in honor of African American History Month, and it also plays into the theme of football for this show. So that's our time for today. I want to thank you, the listeners, for listening, and a special thanks to our callers for sharing their perspectives with us today. Be sure to join us next week at 12 noon for another exciting dialogue. The next topic will be posted soon on Facebook and on Blog Talk Radio, so be sure to follow the show. Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse race, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring your race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences and engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to lead a movement towards racial harmony in America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Episode 2 of Race Haven is sponsored by the 5 for Friends app. 5 for Friends is a mobile app that makes it easy and convenient to verbally keep in touch with family and friends 5 minutes at a time. Visit 5forfriends.com or your app store to download and try it today.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.